Rusty stopped cold. Not the usual sniff-and-assess pause, but a full-body freeze, legs stiff, ears pinned forward, muscles coiled as if ready to retreat. The German shepherd had seen combat, smelled explosives buried under 6 feet of sand, faced gunfire and chaos in Kandahar. But now, in the middle of rural Montana, he stood frozen before the rotting porch of an old wooden house. Jack Rayner gave a light tug on the leash. "Come on, Rusty." The dog didn't budge. His amber eyes were locked on the kitchen window, where a torn curtain swayed slightly, though there wasn't a hint of wind. Rusty let out a low, guttural growl, then stepped back, tail low, fur bristling along his shoulders. Jack frowned. Sophie, his 16-year-old daughter, stood behind him, still hugging the worn duffel bag she hadn't let go of since they left the motel. "Why is he scared of a house, Papa?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack didn't answer. He'd seen Rusty charge into buildings riddled with enemy fighters, sniff out IEDs on roads no sane man would cross. This wasn't fear. It was resistance. The kind born from instinct. And Rusty's instincts had saved Jack's life more times than he could count. They had arrived at the ranch just past sunrise, after a long drive across 3 states in a truck that coughed and wheezed with every uphill stretch. Jack hadn't expected much from the inheritance, a dusty letter from a half-uncle he barely remembered, offering him what's left of the family land. No mention of where or why, just a deed, coordinates, and a short message scrawled in shaky ink. "You inherit the land. The rest Rusty will find." Jack had laughed at the time, thought it was the rambling of an old man. But now, standing in front of a house that looked like it hadn't seen a soul in 20 years, with Rusty refusing to set paw on the porch, he wasn't so sure. The wood beneath his boots groaned as he stepped up onto the deck. Flakes of white paint peeled from the posts, and a warped screen door hung off one hinge like a broken arm. Sophie lingered behind, one hand on Rusty's collar. "Should we wait?" she asked. "No, just let him be. He'll follow when he's ready." Jack pushed open the door. It screeched like a dying animal. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood, old smoke, and something else. Something metallic and dry. Dust floated in thick beams of sunlight, slashing through the cracked windows. The furniture was covered with grimy sheets. A mirror above the fireplace was shattered, its glass curled inward like something had struck it from inside. Jack took a few steps in, boot heels thudding dully on the warped floorboards. A strange pressure settled in his chest. Not fear, not quite, but alertness, the kind that never really left him after the war. Behind him, Rusty let out a single bark. Sharp, urgent. Jack turned just as the dog bolted across the porch, leash snapping loose from Sophie's grip. He didn't enter. The house but raced around the side, nails scrabbling against dirt and gravel. "Rusty!" Jack called, already moving. Sophie dropped her bag and followed. They caught up with the dog behind the house, where a collapsed tool shed leaned drunkenly against a half-dead oak tree. Rusty was digging, fast, aggressive. Dirt flew behind him in dark sprays. He stopped only once to sniff at something buried just beneath the surface, then kept going. Jack knelt beside him, using his hands to clear the loose earth. It took only a few moments to uncover it, a rusted metal box about the size of a shoebox, with a heavy latch and initials etched into the lid. WHR Sophie crouched beside them, brushing hair from her eyes. "What is it?" Jack popped the latch with his knife. Inside were several items wrapped in oilcloth, a hand-drawn map, a brass key unlike any he'd ever seen, and a faded black and white photo. 3 men in military uniforms stood in front of a barn, 2 of them unfamiliar. The third made Jack's breath hitch. It was him, or rather, someone who looked exactly like him, down to the squared jaw and the deep-set eyes. The photo was dated 1945. "Is that you?" Sophie whispered. "No, can't be," Rusty growled again, low and steady. Jack followed the dog's stare and saw it, behind the old tool shed, carved deep into the oak tree's bark, with the same initials from the box and a symbol from the map, a triangle inside a circle, faint but still visible through years of weathering. Beneath it, nearly hidden in the knots of the tree's surface, were more letters. Jack traced them with his fingers. RG plus WHR, what's buried stays buried, until it's time. A breeze stirred the dead grass. Sophie shivered. "Papa, what does it mean?" Jack didn't know, but his gut twisted with the certainty that whatever this was, whoever had left it, knew more about him than they should. And that Rusty, his war-hardened partner, had sensed something neither of them could explain. He looked back toward the broken-down house. Whatever they'd inherited, it wasn't just land. It was a message. And it had been waiting for them. For Rusty. And that message had just been found. Jack Rayner wasn't a man who showed much. Not after 3 tours, a shattered knee from an IED blast in Helmand, and a folded flag handed to him at his wife's funeral just 2 years ago. Grief had moved in quietly, made a home in his chest, and stayed like a shadow that never left. Rusty was the only one who hadn't tried to pull him out of it. The dog simply sat beside him each night, eyes open, breathing slow and steady like a living reminder that not everything from the past was lost. Now, standing in the kitchen of a ranch that felt more like a ghost story than a home, Jack poured lukewarm coffee into a chipped enamel mug and watched his daughter through the cracked window. Sophie sat cross-legged in the tall grass, sketching something in her notebook. Rusty lay beside her, head up, ears twitching every few seconds, alert even in rest. They'd only been here 2 days, but Jack already knew something about this place didn't sit right with Rusty. The first time it happened was near the shed. Jack had gone out back with a crowbar and a stubborn plan to force the door open. The lock was rusted shut, and the hinges had fused together after years of rain and sun. Sophie had followed, camera hanging from her neck like always, snapping pictures of weeds growing out of rusted tools, of a bent weather vane, of a sun-bleached boot half buried in dirt. But Rusty had stopped dead in his tracks again, just like he had at the house. His hackles rose, and he let out a growl that came from deep in his chest. It wasn't the noise of a dog warning off a squirrel or alerting to a distant coyote. This was something else. Jack had seen that growl before, on patrol, just seconds before Rusty pulled him to the ground moments before a roadside bomb went off. "What's under there, boy?" Jack asked softly, approaching the shed's side. Rusty stepped between him and the door, refusing to move. He didn't bare his teeth, but his stance was unshakable. It was protective, not aggressive. Jack backed off. Sophie had watched the scene quietly. "He doesn't trust it," she said. "It's a shed." Jack replied. Sophie just shrugged. "It's Rusty." He doesn't spook easy. Jack had spent years trusting Rusty more than men with radios and maps. The dog had found 6 bombs, 3 hidden snipers, and once alerted the squad to a chemical leak no one else noticed. If Rusty didn't trust the shed, then neither did Jack. But that raised the bigger question. What the hell was buried under it? That night, Sophie curled up on the dusty living room couch, wrapped in 2 old quilts she'd found in a cedar trunk. The wind howled outside. Jack sat with a flashlight and the map they'd found in the tin box. The symbol carved into the oak, the triangle inside the circle, was drawn again on the corner of the map. It wasn't just decoration. It was a key. He traced the hand-drawn lines with his finger. Paths, coordinates, symbols that looked vaguely military, others that were purely personal. One spot, marked with a faint red X, lay directly beneath the shed. The message from the letter echoed in his head. You inherit the land. The rest Rusty will find. He turned off the light and leaned back, listening to the soft breathing of his daughter and the click of Rusty's claws as the dog paced the floor. Even at rest, Rusty never stopped guarding. The next morning, Jack tried again. He brought tools, crowbar, shovel, flashlight. He didn't try to open the shed this time. Instead, he began digging behind it, near the base of the foundation. Rusty barked sharply, then wagged his tail once, circling the area before lying down at a specific patch of ground. Jack dug for an hour and found nothing but dry clay and broken roots. He sat back, wiped sweat from his brow, and looked at Rusty. What are you trying to tell me, partner? Rusty stood, padded over, and sniffed the earth. Then, without hesitation, he began digging again. His front paws worked like shovels, throwing dirt back in perfect rhythm. 5 inches down, his nose bumped against something solid. Jack cleared the rest with his hands. It was a steel hatch, about 2 feet by 3, almost perfectly camouflaged beneath layers of dirt and grass. No lock, just a recessed handle and faded stenciled lettering. Property of W. H. Reeves. That was the same name on the photo from the box. The man who looked just like Jack. His mother had mentioned a distant cousin named Reeves once, long ago, a man who disappeared after the war. Sophie approached, hair messy, hands in her hoodie pockets. What is it? A hatch. Hidden under the shed, she looked at Rusty. He found it? Jack nodded. Of course he did. They pried it open. The hinges groaned, resisting the light of day. A cloud of dust and something like mildew rose up, making Sophie cough. Jack shone the flashlight down. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. Jack didn't move. Rusty didn't either. He scanned the air, nose twitching. No growl this time. No hesitation. Slowly, the dog stepped forward, tail low but not tucked. He sniffed the edge of the hatch and looked down into the gloom. Jack followed Rusty's eyes. The air below smelled dry. Old, but not rotted. Something had been sealed here, protected. Maybe for decades. Sophie put a hand on Jack's arm. Should we go down? Rusty sat beside the hatch and let out a single bark. Short, sharp, directive. Jack stood, bones aching. I guess that's a yes. He climbed down first, flashlight slicing through the darkness. Concrete walls lined with metal shelving came into view. Crates, a small table, filing cabinets, maps pinned to the walls, dust on everything, cobwebs in the corners. Sophie followed, Rusty right behind her. The room smelled like time had stopped. Jack moved to the crates. They weren't locked. Inside were carefully wrapped bundles, old documents, military records, books with faded spines, and gold coins. Not many, but just enough to feel like a pulse of something much bigger. Jack lifted one from the velvet wrap. It gleamed under the light. Pre-war. He whispered, Eagle mint. Sophie stared. What is this place? Rusty walked ahead, deeper into the bunker, nose high, tail wagging slowly now. His ears flicked once. He stopped at a wall covered in photos and notes. Jack stepped closer. Pinned to the center was a photo of a young man in uniform. Below it, typed neatly, Jack Rayner, nephew, USMC, loyal, combat tested, will understand. Jack's breath caught. They weren't just inheriting land. They were inheriting a mission. And Rusty had known from the beginning. Rusty wouldn't stop circling the far corner of the barn. It had. Started right after breakfast. Sophie had gone to feed the chickens they'd inherited along with the land, and Jack had been splitting firewood when the dog bolted toward the weather-beaten barn out back. Rusty didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply stopped and began sniffing furiously at the dusty wooden floor, tail rigid, breath short and sharp. Jack leaned the axe against a log and jogged toward the barn. "What is it, boy?" Rusty didn't look up. He pawed at the ground now, not digging, just brushing aside the dirt and hay with deliberate strokes. When Jack stepped inside, the air changed, cooler, denser, filled with the smell of mildew and dry rot. But beneath that, something else, something faint, metallic. Sophie joined them, wiping sweat from her brow. "He's doing it again," she said. "Yeah," Jack murmured, crouching beside Rusty. Same focus. Same posture, like when he found that weapons cache in Kandahar. "You remember that, buddy?" Rusty gave a low, affirming woof. The barn groaned above them as a breeze passed through, making the rafters creak and dust fall in slow spirals from the ceiling. Jack ran his hand across the floorboards. One of them flexed slightly under pressure. "Here," he said. "Give me that crowbar from the shed." Sophie disappeared and returned seconds later, out of breath but determined. Jack wedged the metal bar under the loose plank and pried. The wood lifted with a cracking sound, revealing a shallow compartment beneath, filled with dust, cobwebs, and what looked like an old metal tin. Rusty nudged it gently with his nose, then stepped back, watching Jack closely. The tin was rectangular, rusted at the corners, but still intact. Jack blew off the dust and opened it. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, were 3 items: a hand-drawn map, a small brass key shaped unlike anything he'd ever seen, and a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time. Jack unfolded the note slowly, the paper soft and fragile in his hands. Sophie peered over his shoulder. The handwriting was neat, but shaky. "Some things can't be taken with you. That's why I left them for someone who knows how to fight." There was no name. But Jack knew. His great-uncle Walter had served in World War II, disappeared from public life in the 60s, and was never heard from again. He was the reason they'd inherited this ranch in the first place. The map was simple, almost childlike. Drawn with charcoal and ink, it outlined the property with familiar landmarks: the oak tree, the barn, the creek bed that bordered the west end. But there were symbols on the map that made no sense at first glance. Triangles, stars, arrows. One location near the barn was marked with an X and a set of coordinates. Scribbled next to it in red pencil was a single word: begin. Sophie touched the key. "It's heavy," she said. "Feel it." Jack took it from her. She was right. It wasn't brass after all. It was something denser, possibly gold, but dulled by age and tarnish. Along the shaft, tiny etchings ran in a spiral pattern, numbers, letters, or maybe both. Rusty sat down, eyes locked on the tin. Was he trying to hide something? Sophie asked. No, Jack said slowly. He was trying to leave something. Outside, the wind picked up again, making the barn's old beams groan louder. Jack folded the map and note, placed them back in the tin with the key, and closed the lid. Rusty stood, tail low but steady, and began walking toward the barn's exit. At the threshold, he stopped, looked back, and gave a short, almost impatient bark. "Guess that means we're not done," Jack said, grabbing the tin and rising to his feet. They followed Rusty around the barn, past the crumbled stone wall that used to mark the boundary of the original homestead. He walked like he knew exactly where he was going, never hesitating, never doubling back. He finally stopped at the base of the old windmill, now nothing more than a skeleton of rusted iron. The dirt beneath the structure looked undisturbed. No signs of digging, no markings. But Rusty began to pace in a circle, nose close to the ground, tail rigid. Jack opened the map again. The coordinates marked on the page, when compared to the natural landmarks, led right here. "This is it," Jack said. Sophie looked skeptical. "It's just a windmill." Jack set the tin down and started clearing debris. Rusty joined him, digging in quick, efficient movements. Within minutes, they uncovered another hatch. This one was heavier, with a thick iron handle set into a concrete slab. Jack strained to lift it, but it didn't budge. "Help me with this." Together, he and Sophie pried it open, the hinges screaming in protest. The smell that rose was different than the one from under the shed. Colder, deeper. It smelled of sealed earth and time. Jack shined his flashlight inside. A short set of stairs led to what looked like another room. Walls made of stone and concrete. No mold, no decay. Almost sterile. Rusty stepped forward without hesitation and began to descend. Jack followed. The room was square, perhaps 10 by 10 feet, lined with shelves and small crates, everything covered in a thin film of dust, but otherwise perfectly preserved. Sophie joined them, mouth slightly open in awe. "What is this place?" Jack didn't answer right away. He moved to one of the shelves, opened a small wooden box, and found a single gold coin. An American double eagle, 1933, pristine condition. His pulse quickened. He opened another crate. Silver dollars, mercury dimes, mint condition. Rusty sat beside him, as if waiting for confirmation. Jack whispered, half to himself, half to the dog. "This isn't just a bunker. It's a vault." He looked at Sophie, then at Rusty. This is what he left behind. Not just land, not just a map. Rusty looked up at him, eyes calm and steady. Jack thought again of the note. Someone who knows how to fight, and suddenly he understood. This wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge, a test, and Rusty was the one who had just passed the first part. The map lay open on the dining table, weighed down by an empty mason jar and a rusted wrench. Morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long bars of gold across the faded paper. Sophie hovered beside it, finger tracing the crude drawings. Her sketchbook sat forgotten, unopened for once. "We should dig," she said quietly. "The vault we found under the windmill, what if there's more?" The symbols match. Look at this one near the creek. Jack stood by the sink, sipping lukewarm coffee. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. Lines around his eyes looked deeper in the morning light. "It's junk," he muttered. "A kid's treasure map." Sophie flinched. "It led us to gold, Papa." Jack set the cup down harder than he meant to. It clanked against the metal sink. "Exactly. A few coins, not a fortune. Maybe he was some old collector. Maybe he had secrets. But I'm not dragging you through this ranch with a shovel and chasing shadows." Rusty, lying near the doorway, lifted his head at Jack's tone. Sophie's voice dropped. "We came here with nothing. You had $17 in your wallet the day we arrived. This land is all we have now." Jack turned away, pressing a hand to the back of his neck. "I know what we have," he said. "I also know the real world doesn't run on stories and half-buried memories." Rusty stood up, walked slowly to the map, and sniffed at the lower corner. Then he looked at Jack. Not a whine, not a bark, just a long, steady stare. Jack looked right back. "You too, huh?" he said. "Starting to believe the fairy tale." Rusty's ears flattened, his tail dropped slightly, not in fear, but disappointment. There was a knock at the door. Sophie flinched again. Rusty growled, deep in his throat, eyes locked on the door before it even opened. Jack moved quickly, stepping in front of Sophie. Through the dusty screen door stood a man in a tailored jacket and polished boots, completely out of place against the backdrop of peeling paint and dry earth. He smiled like he'd been rehearsing it in the mirror. "Mr. Rayner?" he asked, voice warm and easy. "My name's Victor Lane." "I'm with Frontier Development Group." Jack didn't move. What do you want? Well, I heard about the inheritance, Victor said, still smiling. This parcel of land's been on our radar for some time. I thought I'd swing by and make a quick offer. Rusty pushed between Jack's legs, placing himself squarely in front of the doorframe. His stance shifted. Protective. Muscles taut, tail low but not wagging. Victor's eyes flicked to the dog. Is he friendly? Depends who's asking. Jack replied. Victor chuckled politely, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Look, Mr. Rayner, we don't need to dance around it. This property's a mess, but our company sees potential. I'm prepared to offer you $75,000 cash today. Jack blinked. The number struck him harder than he expected. 75 grand. Enough to buy a new truck, pay off old debts. Enough to give Sophie a shot at college. It would change everything. But Rusty took a step forward and let out a single bark, sharp, commanding, almost like a warning shot. Victor took a subtle step back. Sophie grabbed her father's sleeve. Papa, don't! Victor's eyes narrowed, calculating. You'll want to think about it, he said. Offers like this don't stick around. That land may look worthless, but there's more interest than you think. He nodded politely, turned, and walked back to his black SUV parked at the gate. Jack watched him go, jaw clenched. Dust curled behind the tires as Victor drove off. Inside, silence lingered for a beat too long. Then Jack snapped. He turned to Rusty. What was that? He's just a businessman. You can't bark at everyone like they're a damn threat. Rusty didn't flinch. He stood his ground. Jack's voice rose. I'm trying to keep this place together. You think barking at strangers and digging holes in the dirt is helping? Sophie stepped in. Stop yelling at him. He's a dog, Sophie. He's trying to protect us. She shouted back, eyes wet now. You're the one who's not listening. The words hung in the air like a slap. Rusty's ears slowly dropped, and he walked to the porch on his own. He lay down in the dirt, turning his back to the door. Jack stared at the empty space where the dog had stood. Sophie wiped her eyes and walked past him, voice quiet now. You always trusted Rusty before. Why not now? Jack didn't answer. He spent the rest of the day working alone, fixing a fence that didn't need fixing, patching a shed that was already beyond saving. The sun dropped low behind the hills, but the house stayed silent. Rusty didn't come back inside. Sophie didn't speak at dinner. The map was gone from the table. So was the key. Jack sat on the porch that night, coffee gone cold in his hand, watching Rusty lying in the dirt like a stone statue. Unmoving, unblinking, still facing the gate, like he was waiting for something Jack couldn't see. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt unsure. Not about the land, not about the coins or the offer, but about himself. He'd always believed that instincts, Rusty's instincts, meant something, had saved lives, had saved his life. But now he'd ignored them. And something in the way Rusty lay so still made Jack feel like he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The barking started just past midnight. It wasn't the usual alert bark Rusty used when coyotes wandered too close to the chickens. This was sharper, urgent, a rising guttural warning that pulled Sophie out of sleep like a hand yanking her from underwater. She threw on a jacket and rushed to the door. Rusty was at the edge of the property near the tree line, tail high, pacing in tight circles. He barked again, then stopped to look back at her. His eyes met hers like he was waiting. Sophie didn't hesitate. She grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen and slipped outside, bare feet crunching over dry grass. The air was cool, but her hands were sweating. Rusty, what is it? The dog turned and darted toward the creek bed, his body low, movements focused. Sophie followed, the beam of the flashlight bouncing with each step. They crossed the fence line and moved toward the far corner of the ranch, where the land dipped slightly and the grass grew wild. Rusty stopped suddenly, pawing at the dirt with a low whine. His nose was pressed to the ground. He barked twice, then started digging. Sophie aimed the flashlight at the spot. Her heart jumped. It was the same location marked with a red triangle on the map. The same place Jack had brushed off as nothing more than a child's scribble. And Rusty had brought her here in the dark. She dropped to her knees and began helping. The earth was dry, brittle, and cracked, but gave way quickly under their combined effort. After a few minutes, the flashlight caught on something metal, flat, rectangular, buried deep. Rusty barked again and stepped back. Sophie dug harder. It was a steel lockbox. Old, weathered, but intact. A thick chain ran through the handle and padlocked it to a buried bracket beneath the soil. Someone hadn't just hidden it, they'd secured it. She tried to pull it up. It wouldn't budge. "Papa!" she yelled toward the house. "Papa, get out here!" No answer. She screamed again. A light came on in the house, then footsteps. Jack appeared at the porch, squinting into the night. "Sophie, down by the creek. Bring the crowbar." Minutes later, Jack was beside her, panting, sweat on his brow despite the cold. Rusty stood silently now, watching both of them with laser focus. "What is this?" Jack asked, shining his flashlight on the partially unearthed box. Sophie didn't answer. She just pointed to the chain and the padlock. Jack didn't ask more. He slid the crowbar under the edge, working it with slow, practiced pressure. The chain clanked loose, and the box shifted slightly. With a grunt, Jack forced the lid open. The hinges groaned, and then the smell hit them, a mix of age, metal, and oil. Inside, under a layer of black cloth, lay rows of small leather pouches. Jack opened the first. Gold coins spilled into his palm, catching the flashlight beam like frozen fire. Sophie's breath caught. Jack stared at them, motionless. Then he reached for the next pouch. Silver dollars. Then another. Rare commemorative pieces, some sealed in protective sleeves. One coin alone, an 1877 $50 half-union piece, was worth tens of thousands on the open market. And there were more. Dozens more. Sophie picked up a worn, leather-bound notebook tucked beneath the cloth. She opened it gently. The pages were filled with precise, looping handwriting. Inventory lists, dates, names of auction houses, notes about provenance and collectors. Jack flipped through it, scanning the entries. One passage, dated April 1969, made his stomach flip. Sold the 1913 Liberty Head nickel to Langford. Buyer was CIA-linked. Too much heat. Going dark for a while. This collection can't be found, not yet. Not until it's safe. Another, from 1972. They're still watching me. I won't run, but I won't let this die with me. Someone in the family will know what to do. Someone who's seen war. Someone who understands what things are worth. Beyond money. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. His great-uncle Walter wasn't just a hermit. He was a collector. And not of stamps or coins from EBAY. These were ultra-rare pieces, some likely smuggled out of post-war Europe, others acquired from collectors who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Walter had built a collection so rare, so powerful in value and provenance, that the wrong people would kill for it. And he had spent his life hiding it. Rusty sat back on his haunches, still watching Jack, almost as if waiting for him to understand. And he did. Walter had chosen Jack for a reason. A veteran, a fighter, someone who knew what it meant to be hunted, to protect something valuable at any cost. Jack stared into the box, his fingers tightening around the edge. This wasn't a legacy. It was a warning. "Papa," Sophie whispered. How much do you think it's worth? Jack looked at her, at Rusty, then back to the coins glittering in the dark. I don't know, he said, but we just crossed a line. Sophie frowned. What do you mean? Jack looked out toward the road, beyond the hills, as if already expecting headlights to appear. I mean, someone else probably knows it's here. And if Walter was right, they were already on their way. The first sign something was wrong came just after dawn. Rusty growled low in his throat, his body tense, ears perked, nose pointed toward the distant ridge. Jack was seated at the kitchen table with the coin catalogue open and Walter's notebook spread across from it. Sophie was still asleep upstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that came before impact. Jack looked up. Rusty hadn't moved from the window since sunrise. His body was coiled like a spring. What is it, boy? Rusty didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just gave one sharp exhale through his nose and turned towards the door. Jack followed his gaze. Through the kitchen window, just beyond the dry field and near the gravel road that cut through the property, a black SUV was approaching. Then another. Then a third. 3 vehicles. Tinted windows. No markings. Jack's stomach dropped. He stood up fast, grabbing the notebook and the pouch of coins from the table. Sophie! He shouted up the stairs. Get dressed. Now! Rusty darted to the base of the stairs as Sophie scrambled down half-dressed, her face pale and confused. What's going on? We're not alone anymore. By the time Jack threw open the cellar door and shoved the lockbox and notebook inside, the vehicles had stopped 50 yards from the house. Dust billowed around them in slow-moving clouds. The front door creaked. Victor Lane stood on the porch. He wasn't smiling this time. He wore a dark jacket, leather gloves, and behind him stood 4 men. None of them looked like businessmen. One had a military haircut and mirrored glasses. Another wore boots caked in dust and carried something heavy under his coat. Jack! Victor called out. Let's not make this ugly. Rusty stood beside Jack, snarling now. Quiet, contained fury. Sophie whispered, Is that the same guy who offered you the money? Jack nodded. Yeah, but this time he didn't bring a contract. He brought muscle. They backed away from the window. Victor's voice floated through the air again. Calm, controlled. You found something, didn't you? Walter left more than just land. You and I both know that Jack moved fast, grabbing Sophie by the arm and pulling her toward the back hallway. Where are we going? Rusty answered first. The dog darted ahead, paws silent against the wood floor, then nosed open a panel near the back closet. One Jack had always assumed was just for crawlspace access. Behind it was a short, narrow tunnel descending into the dark. Sophie's eyes widened. What is this? Bunker access, Jack said. Old bomb shelter, I think. Walter built this place for secrets. Rusty vanished into the tunnel. Jack shoved Sophie in after him, then closed the panel behind them, just as the front door creaked open again. Inside the narrow shaft, the air was dry, stale, and thick with the scent of dust and rusted metal. Rusty led the way like he'd been down here a dozen times before. Jack followed with one hand on Sophie's back and the other gripping the flashlight. The tunnel bent left, then down, opening into a small room built beneath the house. Walls of reinforced concrete, a steel door at the far end, and old supply crates lining one wall. Jack bolted the door behind them. Are we safe? Sophie whispered. Not for long. He grabbed a tarp from the corner, laid it over the crates, and pulled the light down low. The hum of boots above them echoed faintly through the concrete. Rusty walked to the far wall and began pawing at the corner. What's he doing? I don't know, Jack said. Rusty paused, then pressed his nose against the wall and let out a soft whimper. Jack stepped closer, examining the concrete. There, barely visible, was a metal plate set into the wall. A second exit. Jack grinned, despite the sweat running down his back. Good boy. Rusty waited patiently as Jack pulled the bolts. The wall creaked open on hidden hinges, revealing another tunnel, this one angled up toward the tree line and ending beneath a rotted log Jack had seen dozens of times but never questioned. They moved fast, keeping low. Rusty darted ahead, pausing just long enough to make sure they were still behind him. Behind them, faint shouts rose from the house. Wood splintering, heavy boots crashing through doors. They're tearing the place apart, Sophie breathed. They won't find what matters. Jack said, It's with us now. They reached the end of the tunnel. Jack pushed the log aside and crawled out, pulling Sophie with him. Rusty bounded into the open, ears back, scanning the ridge. Smoke rose in the distance. Jack turned. The house. Orange flames licked at the roofline. Black smoke coiled into the pale morning sky. Victor hadn't come for a conversation. He came to erase everything. Jack's fists clenched. That was our home? Sophie grabbed his sleeve. But he didn't get what he came for. Right. No, Jack said, voice low. Thanks to Rusty. They crouched in the tall grass, watching the fire consume the house. Victor and his men stood nearby, backs turned, confident no one had escaped. Jack pulled Sophie close. Rusty lay beside them, still and quiet. We'll wait, Jack whispered. Let them think we're gone. Sophie nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. Her hand found Rusty's fur and stayed there, fingers gripping tight. That morning, they'd had a house. By noon, they had nothing but a dog, a notebook, and a truth buried deeper than anyone had realized. But they also had a head start. And Rusty had already proven he knew the way forward better than anyone. The tires kicked up dust as Jack's old truck groaned down the winding mountain road, engine coughing like a smoker in winter. The windshield was cracked. The radio was dead. And every few minutes, Jack checked the rearview mirror like he expected black SUVs to materialize from the horizon. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, silent, staring out the window with the journal clutched in her lap. Rusty lay across the back seat, head resting between his front paws, but his eyes stayed open, scanning. They hadn't slept much since the fire. 2 nights camped in the woods, 1 night in an abandoned ranger station. Jack's hands were raw from moving debris and digging in cold soil. His mind hadn't rested once. But the notebook Walter left was clear. The map wasn't just a map. It was a trail, a system. And it was Rusty, not Jack, who understood how to follow it. Jack glanced at the dog through the mirror. Rusty had known before anyone else. He hadn't just protected them. He'd led them. He'd saved their lives, twice, maybe more. And Jack had doubted him. Now he knew better. Next marker's near Copper Ridge, Sophie said, her voice quiet but focused. Jack nodded. Bank vault? That's what it says. Walter mentions a deposit box registered under a false name, but there's a clause. Only a family heir with legal ED and a matching signature can open it. Jack exhaled. So he didn't just bury treasure? He wove in legal fail-safes. Sophie smiled faintly. He thought like a soldier. Rusty shifted in the back seat, ears twitching. He gave a soft chuff, the kind Jack had learned to interpret as something between heads up and we're close. They turned down a forgotten road outside the small mining town of Crescent Falls. The place looked like time had slammed on the brakes sometime in the 1970s. 1 diner, 1 hardware store, 1 small-town bank built from limestone and stubbornness. Jack parked 2 blocks away, just in case. Rusty leapt from the truck the moment the door opened. He sniffed the air, then trotted ahead, pausing at every intersection like he knew the path by heart. Jack held the duffel bag tight. Inside were 2 remaining gold coins and the original deed to the ranch, both proof of identity and of legacy. The notebook was zipped into Sophie's backpack. Everything else they owned fit in the cab of the truck. Inside the bank, the air smelled like old paper and floor polish. A lone clerk looked up from behind the counter, surprised to see strangers. "Can I help you?" Jack stepped forward, keeping his voice calm. "I'm here to access a safe deposit box. It's registered under the name Robert Ellis." The clerk blinked. "That box hasn't been touched in decades." Jack slid his ID across the counter. "The instructions say it requires air verification. I believe I'm the legal next of kin." The clerk hesitated, then nodded slowly and disappeared behind a locked door. Jack turned to Sophie. "Any chance this is a trap?" Sophie looked at Rusty. "He'd let us know." The clerk returned with an older man, probably the manager. He looked at Jack with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "We've been instructed to allow access in the event of verified lineage. Your name checks out with the sealed instructions filed alongside the box." He led them to a back corridor and then into a small room with a thick metal door. A few minutes of verification later, the door creaked open. The box was pulled out and placed on the table. Jack opened it slowly. Inside, beneath another layer of oilcloth, was a collection of documents, photographs, and one sealed envelope marked, "In the event of my death, deliver only to Jack Rayner." Jack's breath caught. His hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. A real one. Not coded. Not cryptic. "Jack, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And it means someone found the ranch before they were supposed to. I knew I couldn't keep them away forever. You're not just my nephew. You're the only one I trust to finish what I couldn't. The collection isn't just about money. It's about keeping pieces of history out of the wrong hands. These coins, these artifacts, they were used to fund wars, bribe governments, silence truth. I've spent my life pulling them from the shadows, but it was never about hoarding. It was about protecting, about choosing who gets to decide what history is worth. I didn't know if you'd ever find the map, but I knew Rusty would. I trained him for this, Jack, not just in scent, in loyalty, in knowing who's still got fight in them. If he led you here, it means you still do. Follow the map. Finish it. Burn what needs burning. Keep what matters. And don't let anyone buy your silence. You'll know what to do. And if you ever doubt yourself, just look at that dog beside you. He knows you better than you know yourself." Walter Jack sat back, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. Rusty stood beside him now, close enough that Jack could feel the heat of his body. The dog looked up at him, eyes steady. Jack reached down and ran his hand through the thick fur on Rusty's neck. "I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." Rusty leaned into his touch. Sophie flipped through the documents. "There are more vault locations and encrypted contact lists for trusted dealers. Walter planned for everything." Jack nodded, the weight of the letter settling in his chest. Outside, the world still turned. The road still stretched out before them. But inside that little bank room, Jack understood something he hadn't before. Rusty wasn't just a war dog. He was Walter's final message, and maybe Jack's clearest path forward. They reached Willow Creek just after sunrise. The last X on Walter's map had brought them here, an overgrown patch of land near the edge of the property line, tucked behind a grove of cottonwoods. The air smelled like river mud and pine bark. Mist curled off the water in long silver strands. Sophie stood beside Jack, holding the map tight. Rusty paced ahead, nose low, tail flicking. He moved like he already knew the ground beneath them mattered. "This is it," Sophie said. "Final vault." Jack knelt, brushing dead leaves aside. The soil here was looser, softer. Recent rains had turned the earth pliable. Rusty whined once, then began digging with purpose, paws cutting deep into the ground. It didn't take long to uncover it. Another steel box, larger than the first two. Welded edges, faded markings along the top. Walter's handwriting, barely visible. Jack pulled the key from his jacket. Rusty stood beside him, watching. Alert. Sophie looked around. We need to be fast. I don't like how quiet it is. Jack inserted the key. The lock clicked, but didn't open. Combination, he muttered. Same as the last. Sophie pulled out Walter's notebook, flipping to the coded page. Try Eleanor's birthday, she said. Jack entered the numbers. The lid opened with a groan. Inside were sealed pouches, more gold, more documents, but on top, placed almost ceremoniously, was a single photo. Walter in uniform, standing next to a much younger man. Jack's father. He stared at it, the weight of generational memory pressing against his chest. Then Rusty barked, twice, sharply. Jack looked up. Movement. From the trees beyond the creek, dark figures emerged. Victor. He wasn't smiling now. He looked angry, desperate. His jacket was unzipped, revealing a sidearm holstered beneath. 5 men flanked him, armed, focused. You just couldn't leave it buried, Victor called out, stepping forward. You had to go all the way, didn't you, Jack? Jack stood, slowly, putting himself between Sophie and the vault. Rusty moved with him, planting himself squarely in front of her, stance rigid, tail low, lips curled just enough to show warning. You're trespassing, Jack said. Turn around. Victor shook his head. I gave you a chance. A peaceful offer. Now I'm going to take what should have been mine. You mean what you never earned. Victor drew his weapon halfway from its holster. And that was when Rusty charged. Not a reckless lunge, not teeth-first aggression. This was trained precision. He sprinted forward, barking with explosive force, angling to cut Victor off. Not attack, but block, warn, redirect. Victor stumbled back in surprise, gun hand faltering. Rusty didn't make contact. He stopped just feet away, barking with rhythmic intensity. Each bark echoed through the trees like a siren. Jack felt his pulse spike. Sophie grabbed his arm. Listen, she whispered. Far in the distance, sirens. Not imagined. Real. Closer than they should have been. Victor's men hesitated, and then from the woods behind them, headlights emerged. 3 cruisers, black and white, the word sheriff printed across the hoods. Armed deputies spilled out fast, rifles drawn. Drop your weapons! A voice boomed. Now! Victor froze, eyes darting. Rusty stopped barking and backed up slowly, returning to Sophie's side without taking his eyes off the threat. Jack raised his hands. Sophie did the same. The deputies surrounded Victor's crew in seconds. Guns lowered, hands raised, metal clinked as zip ties snapped tight. Victor tried one last move, reaching for something in his coat. But Rusty barked again, louder than ever, lunging just enough to knock him off balance. A deputy tackled him from behind. It was over in less than a minute. A tall officer in plain clothes approached Jack. Mid-40s, clean cut, eyes sharp behind dark glasses. You Jack Rayner? I am. Your uncle anticipated this. Jack blinked. What? The officer nodded toward Rusty. That dog's been monitored by our private security firm since Walter's death. We've been on standby. Walter hired us years ago, contracted a shadow team to surveil the ranch from a distance, said if anything ever triggered Rusty's training, if the dog reacted the way he was built to, our job was to follow the signal. Jack looked at Rusty, stunned. He was part of the system. The officer smiled faintly. Part of the alarm. Walter didn't trust cameras or motion sensors. He trusted instinct. So he wired the protection to the one thing that never lied: loyalty. Jack's voice came quiet. Rusty. The officer handed him a folded letter. This was to be delivered in the event of an armed confrontation. You earned this moment. Jack opened it. If you're reading this, it means the vault was opened and someone came to take it by force. You did what I hoped you would. And Rusty, if he's still with you, means you were never alone. Tell Sophie this legacy isn't just about coins. It's about truth. About holding the line when others try to erase it. And tell Rusty. Good boy. Jack lowered the letter. Sophie wrapped her arms around Rusty's neck, whispering into his fur. The dog leaned into her, breathing slow, steady. Victor was hauled away, face hard, mouth tight, defeated. The last vault lay open behind them, but it was no longer about gold. It was about the dog who never backed down, the family that refused to be erased, and a legacy that had waited half a lifetime to find the right hands. The conference room at Langford and Associates smelled faintly of leather and old wood. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, packed with legal volumes no one had touched in decades. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat a man in a navy suit, wire-rimmed glasses perched at the end of his nose. Beside him, a paralegal arranged a stack of folders with practiced efficiency. Jack sat stiffly in the high-backed chair, one hand resting on the manila envelope Walter's security team had handed him at Willow Creek. Sophie sat to his right, legs crossed tightly, her sketchbook closed on the table. Rusty lay at Jack's feet, calm but alert, ears twitching at every creak of the old floor. The lawyer, Daniel Langford, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Mr. Rayner, what you're about to hear might seem unusual, but it's been carefully planned, documented, and verified by independent fiduciaries. Your great-uncle Walter was nothing if not thorough. Jack leaned forward, arms crossed. Go on. Langford opened a red folder. Inside was a single page with Walter's handwriting, notarized and dated 10 years prior. Per the directives of this document, Langford began, the full contents of Walter Reeves' private collection, consisting of rare wartime artifacts, US and European gold coinage, and at least 7 items currently flagged on national heritage registers, were legally transferred into your name in 2013. Jack blinked. 10 years ago. Yes, but with one condition. Langford slid the paper across the table. Jack read the line aloud. The inheritance shall only become accessible when the designated K9, Rusty, confirms the heir's loyalty through observable trust and mutual bond. This shall be verified by behavioral specialists under contract. Jack looked up. You're telling me he trained Rusty to decide if I was worthy? Langford nodded. Not in the way you're thinking. Walter partnered with an advanced K9 behaviorist, Dr. Leland Marsh, formerly with the Department of Defense. Rusty wasn't just trained to detect explosives or threats. He was trained to detect truth, stress indicators, micro-reactions. Sincerity. Jack exhaled slowly. So, all this time he's been evaluating me. Correct, Langford said. Walter believed no amount of paperwork could prove character. But a dog, especially one bonded to the heir by blood and battlefield, could. Sophie leaned forward. And what if Rusty hadn't approved? Langford smiled gently. Then the inheritance would have remained sealed. It would have gone to a national trust or a preservation foundation. But according to Dr. Marsh, Rusty's behavior over the past week, his protective response, his direction, even the way he physically placed himself between your daughter and threats, confirms full loyalty. Jack looked down at Rusty. The dog lifted his head slightly, eyes meeting Jack's without hesitation. No wag, no bark, just quiet certainty. Langford continued. The appraised value of the collection currently stands at approximately $10.4 million, but it could exceed that depending on market fluctuations. Walter also established a trust for Sophie's education and a non-profit endowment tied to veteran support programs. He anticipated that you might want to use this for more than yourself. Jack swallowed hard. Why didn't he just tell me? Langford tapped the page. Because he believed legacy has to be earned, not inherited. And he knew the world you came from, Jack. He trusted you'd know what to do if the time came. Silence hung in the room for a moment. Sophie finally broke it. Rusty knew before any of us. Jack smiled softly. Yeah, he always did. Langford stood and walked to a tall cabinet, opening a locked drawer. He returned with a small black box. Inside was a single gold medallion, embossed with the symbol Walter had carved on the tree all those months ago, a triangle inside a circle. Walter left one more thing, Langford said. This was his signal. His seal. He wanted it given to Rusty. Jack raised an eyebrow. To Rusty? Langford nodded. He said a soldier deserves his badge. Jack took the medallion and turned it over in his hand. The back bore a single inscription, for the one who always knew. Jack knelt beside Rusty, holding the medallion gently against the dog's chest. Rusty didn't move, but he pressed his head against Jack's shoulder, eyes closing in quiet acceptance. Sophie wiped her eyes. That's the real treasure, isn't it? Jack didn't answer right away. He just sat there, one hand on Rusty's back, the other still holding the medallion. He thought about everything Walter had done, the coins, the traps, the layers of protection. But in the end, it hadn't been the gold or the vaults or the legal paperwork that made it all possible. It had been trust, it had been loyalty, and it had been Rusty. He gave us money, Jack said finally. But what he really left behind was a reminder that not everything valuable can be buried. Rusty gave a soft sigh and settled beside him. And Jack understood. This wasn't just the end of a chase. It was the beginning of what came next. Snow melted in lazy trickles down the slope of the old barn, the Colorado sun brushing golden across the early spring fields. At the edge of the pasture, a new sign swayed gently on its cedar post. Hand-carved letters read, "He didn't bark for glory. He barked for the ones who stayed loyal." The house behind it wasn't grand, just sturdy. Stone, timber, wide porch, and windows that opened to the scent of pine and wet grass. A place built not for display, but for healing. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at Willow Creek, since Jack had learned what Walter truly left behind. Now, that legacy breathed in the quiet routines of their new life. Each morning, Jack stepped out to a half-dozen retired K9s, Belgian Malinois, German Shepherds, even a one-eyed Dutch Shepherd, waiting to start their day. Some had scars, some trembled in thunderstorms, some still barked at helicopters in the sky. But all had one thing in common. They were warriors with nowhere to go. Until now. The non-profit they'd started, Rusty's Watch, wasn't just a dog sanctuary. It was a place where veterans, many like Jack, found purpose again. Where old soldiers taught new recruits, and broken bonds slowly mended over training sessions, campfire talks, and quiet moments with a paw on a knee. The ranch didn't make headlines. That was never the goal. But for the men and women who arrived hollow-eyed and left months later with a dog at their side and something solid in their chest, it was everything. On this particular morning, Jack stood at the porch railing, coffee in hand, watching Sophie toss a ball to one of the shepherds. She'd grown in the last half year, not just taller, but brighter, steadier. The kind of confidence that comes from having stood through fire and come out forged. Rusty lay nearby, sprawled out on his side beneath the porch swing. His muzzle had gone grayer, his steps a little slower. But his ears, those ears were still alert, tracking every sound as if the ranch were a battlefield, and peace was a thing to be guarded. Sophie plopped down beside him, tucking her knees under her sweatshirt. She rested her chin on his flank, speaking so softly Jack barely caught it. "He's not just a dog, Papa," she said. "He's our angel." Jack turned to look. Rusty opened one eye, then closed it again, like he'd heard her but wouldn't make a fuss. "Yeah," Jack said, his voice catching a bit. "He is." Later that afternoon, visitors came. Veterans from nearby towns, families interested in adopting. Some just wanted to walk the grounds, to feel something steady beneath their feet. Jack led them on a quiet tour. "This," he said, pausing at the new training ring, "is where trust starts again." A little boy inched close to Rusty, who was lounging nearby, eyes watching but body still. The boy reached out hesitantly. Rusty didn't move, but then slowly the shepherd lifted his head and pressed it into the boy's tiny palm. A murmur went through the group. Jack didn't explain. He didn't need to. That night, as the sun dropped behind the pines, the porch light clicked on automatically. Jack sat with Sophie, watching the shadows lengthen. Inside the house, a log fire crackled. Outside, Rusty kept his post. The stars blinked into view, cold, clear, infinite. Sophie turned toward her father. "Do you think Uncle Walter knew it would end like this?" Jack smiled, just a little. "I think he hoped." A pause. "Do you miss him?" Jack nodded. "Every day, but it feels like he's still watching. Through Rusty. Through you." Sophie leaned into his side. "Through this place." They sat a while longer. No need for words. Then, as the screen faded and a soft piano chord played, the camera moved in on the wooden sign by the gate. He didn't bark for glory. He barked for the ones who stayed loyal, and in a final voiceover, low and steady, "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Share it in the comments. And if Rusty moved you the way he moved us, consider following our channel for more stories that honor courage, loyalty, and second chances. This is German Shepherd Stories, where legends walk on four paws.